I asked you to come on because I've watched you on and off for years, and to me, you do what I think a interviewer, uh, journalist should do, as far as I know, which is you make a point of being impartial, as far as I can tell, and don't give your opinions really. And you even said in an interview that you consider it part of your job to not have an opinion publicly, um, which seems to me, and I may be wrong, to be rare, maybe increasingly rare. And it's what I really wanted to do with my channel, which is very small. I just started this spring, and it's I want to focus much less on telling anybody what to do or what they should think, which is a lot of what YouTube is, and instead focus on uh, improving me and on understanding other people's perspectives. And then if people watching are improved by that, all the better. If they can come to their own conclusions, that's the idea.
Makes
Um,
sense to me.
yeah, and so it just seemed to me you did that kind of you've done that sort of thing for years in a more TV appropriate way, and so yeah, I want to see what I could learn. And
Well, I don't know that you have much to learn from me because, and I'm not saying that with any sense of false modesty. I'm just saying the way the way really one learns how to do this is just by doing it 10,000 times. And that's probably, I mean, I went to journalism school and I learned a little bit doing that. And but in the main, I think the way you get better at this is just to do it over and over and over and over. And I'm 61 years old right now, and I'm still trying to get better at this. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I love going to work every day is that I really hope that I will do tomorrow a better job of what I did today.
yeah, well, it'll be interesting. The other thing is too, I like part of what I think people do with podcasts, and when I say podcasts, I mean audio, video. It's I use the word interchangeably. Um, is they develop a sort of relationship with the person who's doing the podcast. And so to me, if I can show me trying to figure out how to do it better, that actually is part of building that relationship. So
Yeah.
even honestly, if we just talk for 50 minutes or so, and yeah, I still think we'll get somewhere. Now,
Great.
if you can, one thing I was going to ask is that while we're going along, you may do this anyways, take note of how I'm interviewing, and then later on, I'll ask you how I've been doing. So feel free along the way, like as much as you're comfortable. I'm looking for constructive feedback.
Okay. I'm getting my
Yes.
pen out. I'm going to take notes.
Oops, what have I done?
Yeah.
Um, Now I have to say I'm quite aware that my beginning has been a little bit rough, mostly just because I'm kind of whenever I start these, I'm usually pretty wound up. Just even from getting the technical side of it, I find always makes me a little tense. But um, other than that, you can judge me harshly.
No, you can judge me harshly. The first two pens I've taken out here don't work. So I'm going to be taking notes when I have something I think that might be of value to say. But the first thing I've got to do is find a pen that actually works. There we go. Okay. Third time's the charm.
Okay. Um, well, the first thing is more about approach. And we could actually start with being relaxed, assuming you think that's a good thing. Because my feeling is that a lot of interviewing, whether it's one on one, which is more what I do, or in your case, where you usually seems to me you're usually managing a conversation involving multiple people, is coming in with the right mindset. Like, I want to learn something. I'm curious about this person, or if there's some compliment to give someone right away. Like, it's more the coming in with the right attitude. And so, in that spirit, do you have any? Have you found a way to be more relaxed or in the right state of mind, if that's something you think of?
I'm I think it's a bit of a push me pull you. If I can pluck a metaphor from Dr. Doolittle from many, many years ago. I think you want to be relaxed because if you're relaxed, there's a good chance that you're going to do better work. But I don't know that you want to be too relaxed. I think you got to be a little bit on the edge of your seat as well. I think you got to be a little bit nervous. I think you got, I think you've got to worry a little bit about, because to me, fear and nervousness, the fear of failure, the fear of doing a bad job, these are all things that are hugely motivating. And they will motivate you to read the research, to write good questions, to have your wits about you while you're doing the interview, to listen carefully. If you're too relaxed, I'm not sure you're going to do those things. So yeah, not nervous and worried to the point of paranoia and um, you know, to the point where it's debilitating. But a few butterflies in your stomach, Julian, are not a bad thing. And if you can mix that with if you can be sort of churning a little bit on the inside while being very relaxed and enjoying yourself on the outside, that's the mix that I try to go for anyway.
That sounds a lot like my experience doing musical performance as well. Not that I aim for that, but that I think I'm able to at least fake being calm while being somewhat. Yeah, it's an interesting balance, enjoying it, but also being on my toes. Um, you've said that you aren't allowed to have an opinion, as I mentioned earlier. This was.
Well, I'm allowed to have an opinion. I'm just not allowed to express it publicly.
Well, I know that's. But yeah, fine. And I'm wondering if you have anything more to say about that. It's a very open-ended question, but I'm just you said it with a lot of conviction. This was some years ago in your interview with Bob Ray, I think.
Okay. Well, I very much believe it to this day. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I work at TVO. TVO is not a place that encourages the food fight, and it does not encourage its hosts to get out there and take very polarizing views and try to start something with a guest in order to create some kind of phony conflict, which theoretically would bring in more viewers. No, that's not what we do. We're kind of old school in this regard, which is the host can think whatever they want on their own time in their own homes. But when you are representing TVO and when you are conducting a one-on-one interview with somebody or conducting a panel discussion about something, the purpose of it is not for you to get up on a pedestal and opine what you think on the subject. The purpose of it is to find out what the other person thinks. And of course, during the course of doing that, you may need to throw a couple of, we're in baseball season here, so you may need to throw a couple of brushback pitches just to get better stuff out of the person that you're talking to. But that doesn't require you to be opinionated. It just requires you from time to time to be a little bit aggressive or in their kitchen, or, and you bring a mix of emotions to the thing. Sometimes you're going to want to sit back and just not say anything. Other times you're going to want to be a little more aggressive and get in there. So I have opinions on some things. The things that are controversial and that I should not be publicly expressing opinions about, I don't. Partly because if I want people from all different viewpoints to come on the program that I do and feel they're dealing with an honest broker who will give them an honest hearing, then I can't very well be extremely opinionated and tell them that they're wrong the first thing something comes out of their mouth. So that's the thinking behind it.
Right. I'm concerned. Well, this is related to that. I don't know if there's anything more to say about that, but I have been concerned with wanting to argue with people I'm talking to. So far, I've managed to come with what I think is the right attitude, where I'm curious and where I want them to have a chance to say what they have to say. But I'm still waiting for the time where they say something that I think is so outlandish that I want to argue with it. So I don't know if you have any further advice about how to deal with that specifically. Like, is there ever a time where you feel that, or what?
Barely ever, but it's happened. And I do recall we did a program, I think it was a few years ago, dealing with housing or development issues or something like that, how much to grow and how to control urban growth, that type of thing. And we had a politician from York Region who was part of our panel. And that guest said in response to another person's comments, well, the facts may be on his side, but here's what I think. And I almost never do this, but I interrupted the person and I said, well, wait a second. If the facts are on his side, then he's won the argument. We deal in empirically provable facts here. We're not dealing in just opinions that have no basis in fact. So if the facts are on his side, it's case closed. We're not really that interested in what you have to say if it's not based on facts. Mm-hmm. And it was a little more aggressive than I usually am, but the guy had to concede that, I had a point. And the point was, if, as you said at the beginning of all of this, the idea is not to sort of jam your opinions down other people's throats, but actually to encourage an open-ended conversation and let independently thinking people make up their own minds based on the arguments that they hear, then facts matter. And I'm from a school where empirically provable facts matter. And if you've got the preponderance of them on your side, well, then you're persuasive, then you win. I do remember a former Premier of Ontario, John Robarts, who was the Premier during the 1960s, once saying that, by the time an issue got to his desk, he could flip a coin as to how to figure out how to resolve it. And by that he meant, and I remember talking to Dalton McGuinty, another former Premier, about this as well. Mr. McGuinty once said, an issue can be so controversial and so complicated, it gets to my desk and maybe the facts line up 51-49 on one side, and so that's the decision you go with. And then 2 weeks later, the state of play changes and it's 51-49 the other way. And that's the nature of the kinds of issues that we discuss on the agenda, which is to say that they're usually controversial. They're usually not 90-10 issues. They're not slam dunks. They are debatable. And that's why we debate them. And that's why that's part of the reason why I don't feel a need to be opinionated about anything because on the program, because nothing's that clear cut. All sides can marshal pretty good arguments, and then the viewer will decide who's got the best arguments.
Okay, so it's sort of humility is kind of built into the formula of the show to some degree, I guess. But also, I think even that recognition, though, I don't know if I've ever heard anyone say, I'm not sure I ever will hear anyone again say that they cover in their journalism a whole range of subjects that are debatable and as such could go either way. Like normally I don't know people that doesn't seem to be a popular sentiment anymore, but
no, and I think we need to get back to it. I think one of the reasons that and this is a particular problem in the United States where one cable channel very much comes from a particular point of view and another comes from a very different point of view, and a third tries to sort of go back and forth or whatever. Anyway, that's all branding. I don't know how much journalism is going on there. That's all branding about here's an audience we want to appeal to. So this is what our worldview is. And therefore, anything the other side has to say is automatically irrelevant and needs to be attacked. Well, I guess that could be fun and predictable to watch. But does that really, does that move the yardsticks at all in terms of understanding? I don't think so.
No. If that, I would love to talk about that stuff too. I wanted to keep this very much on the at least initially on the straight and narrow with regards to general advice. But I'm very interested in that subject and what you might have to say about it. One thing
I apologize if you're hearing background noise here. I think the guy next door is using his leaf blower, and it's extremely noisy where I am. If you're not hearing it, that's great.
No, so far so good.
Good.
One thing I remember being impressed with watching you years ago, and I don't remember the question. There was some question you asked a guest, and they gave an answer. And it was, as I remember it, somewhat involved. I have no idea what it was about. And you asked what sounded to me, in my ignorance, like a good follow-up question. I thought, you actually understood everything they said and came up with an answer. I don't know that there's much that you can really advise much with this, but do you have anything you can think of, any advice for listening and understanding and coming up with a good follow-up question outside of good research and just being, paying attention and being quick?
Well, there's a bunch of things there. And number one, if you've accurately characterized what happened, then first of all, thank you. And second of all, it happened first and foremost because I listened. And you would be amazed. Just watch people on television who do interviews, or listen to the radio and listen to how people do interviews. How many of them ask a question, don't get a responsive answer, and then move on to the next thing because they haven't really listened to the answer. They have a list of questions that they need to get through, and so they do. And for whatever reason, I took very good advice many years ago when I started this from somebody who just said, listen to the answers, and then let your, if you're well prepared, let your innate curiosity follow up and take you where you want to go. And I think that's the way to go. Boy, this guy with the leaf blower next door is making it difficult for me to concentrate, but I'll see if I can power through here. Listening is the most important thing you can do in an interview. And then asking good follow-up questions is the next most important thing. I go into every single interview with a kind of a cheat sheet of questions to ask, but I don't think I've ever done an interview in my life where it went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We never go in order because you can't necessarily predict what the answers are going to be. And if an answer takes you in a different direction, well, then you've got to leave the sheet and you've got to follow where the trail takes you. And then you can come back to it. And, the interviews that I do almost always start in a place where I know I want to start, and they end in a place where I know I want to end. But in the middle, it's very often an unexpected journey. And that's, I guess, part of the reason why I hope the conversations are interesting, because they don't just necessarily take a very predictable path.
Okay, well, that's a very useful bit of advice for this conversation, because one of my difficulties is that in some of the conversations I've had, I do that. I go to the extreme. I go in quite familiar with the subject, but I have maybe some questions written out, but I basically ignore them and I just talk to the person. And then in this one, because I thought, well, I don't know that we have a lot of time by my standards, right? In podcasting world, like 3 hours is a podcast. At least that's what I'm used to. So
I'll confirm that we do not have 3 hours.
Yeah. So like I've got this, you can see I've got a list here, and I was just going through them, but that's not normally what I like to do. And I know one of the questions somewhere on there was, what is your opinion of going through questions versus just natural conversation? So I'm going to take your advice right now, and I'm going to not go through it point by point.
But it's good to have, I think it's good to have the list there as a guide, and I'm happy to have it as a guide when I do interviews. Mm-hmm. You just can't be a slave to it. That's all. And I know some people, for example, I watched Peter Mansbridge do interviews over the years. I don't ever recall him going in to an interview with a sheet of paper. I think he sort of knows where he wants him to start, and he knows where he wants him to end. And then in between, he's just listening and sort of, he knows the subject matter well enough that he'll be able to come up with a good question based on the research that he's done. I'll give him credit for that. I don't know that even after doing this for almost 40 years that I have the comfort yet of going into an interview without a cheat sheet in front of me. If you told me I had to do it, of course I would do it, but I like to have something there just in case. But you shouldn't be a slave to it.
Yeah. That's kind of the way I like to look at it, actually. Is that it's handy to have it there if you need it.
Yeah.
Now, what about research? Now, I know, at least I think you said somewhere that there are other people who will find your guests for you. Is that correct? Because that's something
it's actually imperative, because I'm the host of the program, but I don't book any of the guests who appear on the program, except for the shows that I produce myself. And even then, I need to get a sign off, as do all the producers, from the executive producer of the show, who is the ultimate authority editorially on the program. So the producers produce, and I produce. And when we have an idea that gets the green light from the executive producer, we go to her and we say, here's who I'm thinking of for this position, and here's who I think should represent this position. And not frequently, but occasionally, she will say something like, we just had them on a couple of weeks ago. Can you think of somebody else? Or, have you thought about this, maybe as a preferable guest? And those suggestions are almost always very helpful. I think one of the reasons that they don't want the host booking the show, and I think it's a very good reason, is that people will spend all day long lobbying me to get on. And that's not, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to be lobbied for a position on the program. And I'm happy to be able to tell people, look, I'm thrilled that you want to be on the program. Sounds like you got a good story to tell, but I don't book the show. So you've got to go through either our senior editor or one of our producers and convince them. And that's the way to do it. And you remember Larry King, who used to do a show on CNN for 25 years? Larry King was the same way. Larry King always used to say, I don't book the show. If you want on, don't come to me. I don't book the show. And I think it's a way of insulating hosts as well, who get a disproportionate amount of the attention from the viewers. And so people assume you have a disproportionate amount of the power. And in fact, you don't. In fact, I have sort of solid authority once the interview begins to take it where I think it needs to go. But before that, the producer has all the authority to pick the topic, book the guests, write the suggested questions, which I will then vet, and then be in my ear during the course of the interview as to where they think the interview should be going. And I'll have a sense of where I think it should be going actually doing it, but they will have a different sense being in the control room and watching it sort of on television in the control room, which is, of course, how our viewers are going to watch it. So between those two sort of, I'm not sure they're competing interests, but they're not necessarily the same interests. That's the process we go through to get an interview on the air.
Right. So in other words, as a one-man show, I'm doomed.
Not at all. It's just different from what I do. That's all.
No, what I mean is, I had not thought of the possibility that there may be people who are getting constant emails saying, "Let me on, let me on, let me on." And if you're just doing it on your own, then there's no way to say, "Oh, well, you've got to ask someone else." Like it's now in the early stages, I'm happy to have people contact me because it could be interesting. I've already had that. It actually worked out to my advantage and that's part of the fun of the podcasting internet world is that you can get contacted by someone and who knows what'll come out of it.
Sure.
So as far as doing research goes, obviously you do that. So do you have any advice for research? Now you're more topic. No, I think it's fair. It's a fair question. Yeah. So
well, there's two different kinds of research that I do. Number one, and again, most of the programs we do, producers produce, but probably once every 10 days or so, I produce a program too. So in that case, I'm responsible for getting the research for my own program together. But the producers are responsible for getting a virtual file folder of research to me. And that's basically what I do. That's what I do every night. I'm here in my attic every night reading my research and vetting questions and, going through guest profiles. And that's what I do every night to get ready for the next day's tapings. And so that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is, I've been in journalism now for almost 40 years, which means I do have a decent foundation of firsthand knowledge to draw upon that maybe a 26-year-old producer will not have. And so the mix of the research I get from that producer, plus my own personal memories and experiences, I hope is a good overall mix of information to have when I go into an interview or a panel discussion.
Right. Yeah. And I definitely get the sense of that. Just in the way you talk, that I can tell there's a lot that you have that you can draw on, which, well, it's the way it goes. I may not.
How old are you?
32.
Okay. So
32.
An old 32.
Yeah.
So I'm almost, not quite, but almost twice your age, which means that, I have firsthand memories of having covered the government of Ontario in the early 1980s. When, you were barely born. Right. So that stuff is all very helpful to me if I'm conducting a discussion, as I did earlier today, which will air tonight, about Queen's Park and about Ontario politics. And there may be some things that some people say that I will think, you know what, they tried that in 1987 and it really didn't work. But, here's what I know about how that worked. How are you going to be different to make sure that it works better this time? So that kind of stuff is helpful to be able to call upon.
Have you found that interviewing, of course you've been doing it for a long time now, helps with or has an effect on how you go about the rest of your life? Do you think you're more of an interviewer because of it?
I think I got into the profession that I got into because of the nature of my personality. I'm extremely curious about how the world works. And if I'm just, whatever, if I'm out at a party, doesn't matter where I am. If I'm at a ball game, it is inevitable that at some point I'm going to start interrogating whoever I'm with. And when I say interrogating, I'm pushing that a bit much. I'm going to start asking questions because I genuinely want to know stuff. I want to know things. I want to know how the world ticks. I remember we had a really renowned investigative journalist named Seymour Hersh, who did a lot of excellent coverage in Vietnam, 50 years ago. And he's in his 80s now, but he's a legendary reporter. And he was on the program, and he came in, and as he was sitting in the makeup chair talking to our makeup artist, he said, "So how long have you been a makeup artist? And where are you from? And what kind of products do you use? And where do you get them from?" And I just thought to myself, this guy's 80. He's been made up. I mean, how many hundreds of times in his life has he had a makeup artist put stuff on his face? And look at him. He's still curious. He still wants to know all about this makeup artist and why she does what she does and how long she's done it for and all of this. And I just thought, I get that. That's me. I want to know everything. I want to know everything I possibly can. And so it doesn't matter where I am. It's almost, I would say, an occupational hazard, but it's not an occupational hazard. It's just my personality to be asking a lot of questions and wanting to know more about the human condition. That must be why you do what you do as well.
Oh, I think it is. I mean, honestly, there is some ego involved, but mostly I think that is it. There is so much to find out about, and the thing with, well, I'm sorry, there's gonna be a multi-part answer question, which I know is a bad thing, but anyway, how much do you follow podcasts? Like, how much do you have other podcasts that you like to listen to? I'm not going to ask what they are. I'm just wondering.
You can ask.
But
okay. Well, I subscribe to the On Poly podcast hosted by Steve Paikin and
Yeah.
John Michael McGrath because I think that's really good.
yeah,
1867 and All That is a good historical podcast. Against the Rules, Michael Lewis, and Another Thing, Tony Clement and Jody Jenkins. Canada Land, Jesse Brown. CBC News at Issue. Conversations with Canadians, Mike Ryan. I subscribe to the CTV National News here because I never get to watch it, so I listen to it on a podcast. Evan Solomon's Question Period, Curse of Politics with David Hurley and the gang. Daisy Land, Fox News Sunday, From John to Justin, all about prime ministers. Hacks on Tap, Hebsy on Sports. Alec Baldwin's Here's the Thing. Ladies Talking Leafs. A couple of acquaintances of mine started a podcast about the Maple Leafs. I unfortunately like the Maple Leafs. Literally with Rob Lowe, Morning Joe on MSNBC, No Nonsense, Pamela Wallen, Not That Kind of Rabbi, Ralph Ben-Mergy, On the Ledge, another Ontario politics one, Real Clear Politics, The Takeaway, Pucks and Cups, Hockey History, Reliable Sources, Brian Stelter, Smartless, which is a lot of fun, little guilty pleasure, Showbiz, Spit and Chicklets, which is hilarious. It's all about hockey, Sway, Kara Swisher, The Backbench, Baseball Hour with Tony Maz. That's all about the Red Sox, whom I love more than life itself. Bob McCowan's podcast, Peter Mansbridge's podcast, The Bridge, the Carson podcast, all about Johnny Carson, The Daily from the New York Times, Don Cherry's Grapevine, The Hurley Burley, Jordan B. Peterson, The White Saviors, Return to Thunder Bay, the Ticats Audio Network. I'm from Hamilton. I follow the Ticats. Toronto Mike. I like Toronto Mike. He's got a lot of long-form journalism on. West of Center, which is all about Alberta, and WTF with Mark Maron. That's my list of podcasts. Okay. And it was probably twice as long 2 weeks ago, but I ran out of room on my iPhone, so I deleted half of them that I've really kind of stopped listening to on a regular basis. So that's what I can fit.
And you listen to those on a regular basis?
I do try. Now, when I go to bed, for whatever reason, when I was a kid, I went to sleep with the Johnny Carson show on. For your younger viewers and listeners, Johnny Carson was today's, back then, he was a Jimmy Fallon or Jimmy Kimmel of today. He was the king of late night. He was the greatest late night host in history. Letterman before Dave. And I used to go to bed with him on from the age of 13 on. So for whatever reason, I liked hearing people talk to me to help me go to sleep. So I still do that. I pop my earbuds in and I go to sleep listening to podcasts. And for whatever reason, if I fall asleep in the middle of the podcast, when I wake up the next day, I remember where I left off and I'll go listen to the rest of it at that point. And that's a good way, I find, to stay, because I don't know about you, but when I go to bed and I lie down, I'm awake for half an hour before I actually fall asleep. So, and I play them all at double speed. So that's a good shit there. I mean, there's an hour right there. That's how I keep up on stuff.
People talk about playing podcasts at faster than regular speed, and I haven't tried it yet. I'm surprised people do it. I would think it would just be weird.
It is the first week, and then you really get the hang of it. And then
Okay.
you start asking yourself, gosh, why are people talking so slowly? You
Yeah.
can do it.
Yeah. Or you ask yourself, gosh, why are people talking so slowly? But um, yeah, now why'd I ask that? Oh yeah,
Now, Peter Mansbridge won't like me saying this, but I play his at double speed, and it makes him sound like he's talking at normal speed because even he admits he is a very slow talker, and I cannot listen
Mhm.
that slowly.
That's authoritative and thoughtful, I'm
I
sure.
agree, but I can't listen that slowly.
Yeah. Um, anyway, it just you talk about curiosity, and the thing is, it's really, really it just gets me more and more how much stuff there is out there. Podcasts really bring it out because there's all this stuff that couldn't be. I don't know most of the podcasts you mentioned, so I don't know um, what sort of podcasts they are, but like especially the
Well,
longer
news and
form.
current affairs is the gist of it,
Yeah,
and some sports in there too.
right. Although I know you've got the Peterson podcast there, so that's kind of a special case. Um,
Well, you know what? I keep an eye on Jordan Peterson
mhm.
because, and again, how do I put this? I mean, Jordan Peterson became famous because of TVO. We gave
Yes.
him his first break. Our producer, Wojtek Schemberg, booked him for the first time on television and liked him and booked him again and again and again and again.
Mhm.
And of course, one of the most, I think undoubtedly the most downloaded show we've ever done was the one in which Jordan Peterson talked about the pronouns and being prepared to go to jail if a Human Rights Commission demanded that he use pronouns that he didn't want to use. And that thing went viral all over the world. I remember being in London, England, and some guy from Brazil came up to me and said, gosh, you look familiar. How do I know you? And I said, where are you from? Brazil. Well, I've never been to Brazil. There's no way you could know me. And then he said, yes, right. You did the interview with Jordan Peterson. It's on YouTube. I've seen it. So yes, that thing went viral. And so I like to keep an eye on what he's doing, just because we have a lot of history.
Oh yeah, no, and I've seen everything that you've made, the two of you. So, together that is. I haven't watched every TVO episode, unfortunately. Um, yeah. Anyways, yeah, but there's so much out there that yeah, it's a great time to be curious about this sort of thing and to contact people. Like I've had a lot of success contacting people who are making podcasts that I find interesting. And yeah, I'm getting them to come on. So
Do you know, Julian, I think podcasts are great proof of the fact that most people who program television stations and say people only have an appetite for a 6-minute interview maximum or a 15-minute panel maximum are just full of it. Because there are, who's the guy who does the history podcasts that go on for 3 or 4 hours? We had him on our program. Geez, I'm blanking on his name now, but he does a fantastic World War II podcast. That's wonderful. And I listened to before he came on our program. I listened to a bunch, and I listened to a bunch afterwards, and then I sort of fell by the wayside as I try and keep up with all the Canadian stuff. But it demonstrates to me, and the long form stuff that you're doing demonstrates to me that there's an appetite for longer, more in depth, more meaningful conversations. And the notion that we've got to sum everything up in 6 minutes is just ridiculous. People, yes, some people have a shorter attention span because of they grew up in the MTV generation, et cetera. But other people are really yearning for something more in depth to connect to. And I hope that's where you and I come into this mix.
yeah. Oh, and for my part, and I really didn't watch TV much growing up, and then I've just completely gotten lost in podcasts in the last 5 years or so. And to me, watching you on TVO, like that's where it starts in terms of length. I don't want anything shorter than that, and then it just goes up and up and up. And I'll listen to. I guess the longest podcast I've listened to would have been 4 hours long, and so especially if you
What
can.
was that?
It would have been a Joe Rogan episode, probably.
Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Who does not make the biggest podcasts. There are longer podcasts than those. But
What else? Drop some of the other ones on me that you listen to, just
okay,
because
sure, yeah.
you got my list, and I'm curious about what you listen to.
Yeah, okay. So definitely none of them do I listen to every episode pretty much. It's more that I'll listen to I'll just see what's up and if it's interesting. But definitely
Sure.
some of his stuff is useful. And there it's the variety. And this is the case with a lot of them is that I've been able to, in pretty much the last 5 years, listen to people I never would have heard of before. If I had heard of them, I could easily have heard of them in a way. This goes back to media companies with their own angle. I might easily have just heard about them in a way that put me off them, and I never looked into them. So instead, I
Hmm.
get a much greater variety of perspectives. Um, so him, um, what else do I listen to? I listen to this at the first of all, I'm just curious, when you have you looked at my channel at all, or have you just come on blind?
You sent me a couple of links
Yes. Yeah.
when you invited me, and I did
Mhm.
look at those.
Okay, okay. So one of the concerns I actually had at that time was that I haven't got a very balanced range of people yet. And so since I want people to come on, I don't want them to think, oh, this is just about this, it's just about that, it's just from this perspective. But going back actually to the episode that you did um, on on essentially pronouns and the law and Jordan Peterson, it was right around then that I got thinking about having a podcast. And all along, part of it was I want to talk to people like your guest that you had then, Theron Meyer, um, who I want to talk to them 4 hours to get their perspective and know what things are like. Not to agree, disagree, nothing, just to know what's going on. And so a number of what I have, both podcasts I listened to as well as episodes I've made, have been in that sex and gender department.
Gotcha.
Um, and so there's a few of those. There's an interesting organization that started up recently in Canada called GDAC, Gender Dysphoria Alliance of Canada. That's interesting. I listened to various black academics that talk about various common black issues, but from different points of view, other than what you might hear in the mainstream, and more subtle than any then it doesn't, from my point of view, doesn't appear to be pushing a particular perspective. So that's interesting.
Mhm.
Um, I know there's a whole bunch. I did not have this prepared in my brain. I'm sure that there are a lot of others because it's a big part of what I like to do in my free time. But let me think. What other ones have I listened to? I do watch Jordan Peterson's from time to time.
Mhm.
Um,
Any sports in there?
no, I've never taken to sports.
I can tell that about you. I was kind of being facetious. You don't seem to me to be a sportsy kind of guy.
But yeah, no, it's more philosophy and I don't know, experiences and some science. So, oh, that's the other big podcast I like to listen to, and this one isn't, I don't think, particularly well known, but the Lex Friedman podcast. That's an American podcast.
Okay.
He's a programmer and scientist, and he started out doing a artificial intelligence podcast.
Huh.
That's what it was called, and then it's broadened out to be like a Joe Rogan thing where everybody's on there. And he's very much, he'll say what his, to some degree, his opinions, but it's really focused on the guest. So there've been some where there's a little bit of a debate about something, but I don't get the feeling that like that's not the main thing.
Got it.
So that's interesting, and that's another one that can go on for hours. I'm working on an episode right now. It's 4 hours long, I think. So
Hmm.
you don't usually do that in one sitting. Um,
No.
but yeah, yes, and I just realized you turned the tables and are interviewing me, and that wasn't supposed to happen.
Well, I thought this was a conversation, so we're conversing.
You're true. That's true. It is, and in fact, I'm regretting that I approached this so much with a list rather than just kind of loading some subjects into my brain and then letting it go. Um, I am curious to know though about TVO and the agenda specifically. So this bridges over nicely between the various things we've been talking about. How unusual do you think it is, like the agenda, in the world of media, which I can't say I'm that familiar with? How unusual is it to have, say, 30, 20 minute, even I think you go with sometimes you talk to one person for close to an hour, like if they published a book or something. And again, as far as I can tell, just trying to interview them, not pushing a particular view, especially that not pushing a particular view. How rare does that seem to be now?
Well, I probably watch as much TV as anybody, and I do watch a lot of the current affairs programs. And I don't see anybody else necessarily on a daily basis with as few resources as we have. We're TVO, we're not CNN. We don't have a staff of 350 people or a budget of, $75 million for one program to go off and cover things. We're a very lean operation. I think we cost Ontario citizens $3 per person per year in terms of the provincial allocation to our overall budget. And I think for $3 per person per year, we give pretty good value. But yeah, I remember when we signed on, this is, I think, the 16th season of the agenda, and we signed on by saying, we're going to be the program that dares to bore you. And by that, we meant,
That's a great motto.
Well, by that I meant we're going to do one-on-one interviews that last 20 minutes or 25 minutes or 30 or sometimes 57. We're going to do panel discussions that last 40 minutes or 60 minutes. And not everybody will be interested in that much depth, but there is an audience for it. And if public television doesn't do it, I can tell you this: private television isn't going to do it. So we should do it. If we're going to be worthy of that provincial support, we need to provide something that is different from what everybody else has got on the dial. And that's the first question I ask myself after every show, Julian. I ask myself, was this program that we just did different enough from anything else I would have seen on television? And if it wasn't, then we've failed in our mission. But if it was, then we've succeeded. And, I don't know that, look, I don't know whether every single night we fulfill our mission, but I think most nights we do. It's up to the viewers to decide whether we do or don't. But that's the idea. The idea is we've got to be distinctive. We've got to be different. And as I look all over the dial at the different current affairs shows that are on, I hope and I think we are.
Right. So do you have any thoughts, either now or if and when you retire, of doing your own? I know you already do you've done what you do, one podcast. You did a limited run, but I mean, like, one where it's like long form, the Steve Paikin show. You could call all the shots, do everything the way you want. You can have a 3-hour sports conversation. You can have whatever.
How do I put this? I'm very focused, because of the nature of my job, on today. And the scenario you have just described may happen, but if it does, it will happen many, many years down the road, because I've still got to worry about today. I've got a show to record tomorrow. I have a weekly podcast I've got to do with John Michael McGrath. I have a weekly newsletter I've got to do with John Michael McGrath. I have shows that I have to produce myself. I have usually 1 or 2 columns for tvo.org, our website, that I have to write every week. Last year, I was writing a biweekly column for the Toronto Star about democracy. Did that for a little while. I'm writing a book right now about the late John Turner, former Prime Minister of Canada, which takes up a great deal of my so-called spare time. So the scenario you've just described is nothing I can imagine taking on anytime soon. I got to get done what I got to get done first.
Okay, sure. Let me change it then. Hypothetically, does
there you
that
go.
seem interesting to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Hypothetically, it seems very interesting. Hypothetically, once I'm past the point of sort of doing my real job, which I still love doing and which they apparently still want me to do, which is nice, that's something that sounds really intriguing. And but that's down the road. That's nothing I'm thinking about right now.
I can think. I don't know. It's hard to know what the market, so to speak, of or for impartial political podcasts is, but it seems to me that might be an interesting thing, since politics, in my research, politics and sports seem to be your big focuses. And I would think a politics show, whether it's local or not, I think you could go global with the internet, and you could have because I don't think there are many people who are interested in doing shows and podcasts on the internet which are impartial about anything.
Well, let me tell you a little story about that. When you say you could go global, we did a program on the agenda several years ago about childcare. And I got an email from somebody in Sweden who said, that show you just did about childcare? You guys have all the same issues that you're facing there that we are over in Sweden. So I took your show off YouTube and played it for our interest group that is trying to make some progress on childcare in Sweden. And it was very helpful. So thank you. And at that moment, it sort of occurred to me that while obviously the preponderance of our audience is inside the boundaries of the province of Ontario, the internet doesn't respect any boundaries. And people find, I was telling you earlier about the guy from Brazil who found our show on Jordan Peterson. You know, these things, once you put them up on YouTube or you put them on Facebook or you put them on Twitter or wherever, they take on a life of their own. And while we do a program on TVO, people all over the place watch it. And I'm constantly surprised at the emails or letters that I get from people outside Ontario who somehow find the show by accident and like it and get hooked. So, in some respects, I think we're already sort of doing something kind of sort of global. It may be focused on Ontario, but the issues are universal and other people are interested.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like there's potential there, and it would be an interesting.
Well, talk to me again in a few years. We'll
In a
see.
few, yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. I will. I'll just keep bugging you every few years. Um. Uh, oh, here's something I'm curious about because I have no perspective on the media. Has it gotten worse? Like, has it gotten more partisan?
Uh,
And that may be too
well,
simple.
again, I think it depends on what side of the border you're on. If you're talking about in the United States, yes, clearly there are, Fox is the conservative Republican channel, MSNBC is the liberal Democrat channel, CNN sort of, I don't know, tries, I think probably hovers more closer to, actually, I think I'm probably going to get flack for this, but I think CNN tries its best um, to cover things pretty straight up. And again, we have to make a distinction here. Fox's journalism is not too bad. Like, I think Chris Wallace is a pretty straight ahead guy. I think the stuff they have on during the day, Brett Baer, Martha McCallum, I think they're pretty straight ahead journalists. The prime time lineup is an entirely different story. Hannity and Laura Ingraham and Tucker Carlson, they're just different. In the same way that I, suspect, well, Chris Cuomo on CNN, for example, and I think he probably comes at things from a particular point of view as well. Although I think he's more open to empirically provable facts in a way that the folks who work on Fox are not.
Mm-hmm.
But in Canada, I think for the most part, I'm not talking about the opinion columnists here who are supposed to have, a take on things. I think for the most part, the media in Canada seem to be trying to just cover things as straight up as they possibly can. Now, I'm happy to be told that I'm completely wrong on that, but it seems to me, just in the city I live in right now, the Toronto Star, obviously from an editorial point of view, comes at things from a small L liberal point of view. The Toronto Sun comes at things. The National Post comes at things from a small C conservative point of view. Globe and Mail is sort of somewhere in the middle, but I don't know that spills too much into the copy. Now, maybe the choices that they make, maybe the choices of what the Sun covers reflect that interest, or what the National Post will cover will reflect that interest. But it's hard for me to know. I've been reporting and doing journalism in Toronto for, I don't know what, 39 years now. And it may well be that I am just such a product of this that I'm incapable of seeing what other people see, and other people may see incredible bias right across the board, not just in editorials, not just in op-ed columns, but in the copy as well. I frankly don't see that. I think back, you may remember when Dalton McGuinty was Premier of Ontario, the newspaper that did some of the toughest reporting on him, on the gas plant scandals and on the orange scandal, the air ambulance system, was the Toronto Star. I mean, they did some of the toughest coverage on that. And that's supposedly, quote unquote, the big L liberal newspaper. Well, I don't know. I think they just took a pretty straight ahead approach to try to find out facts. And some of those facts happen to be embarrassing to the government of the day, and they reported it anyway. So, I don't know. That's my take
Yeah,
on it.
yeah. I have a different one, but I don't know that we
Go
have
ahead.
time.
Tell me.
I don't. Well, I'm intimidated by the fact that you definitely pay attention to, like, at this point I pay attention a lot to online sources for information, and plus I just don't follow a lot of current things. Period. Like, I would prefer to delve into a few things that I'm interested in and really feel like I'm getting rounded perspective and things I need to know, but a lot of other things I just let slide. So I say this from a great state of ignorance, but on the few issues I've followed, now, I mean, okay, but I'm pretty happy in this conversation to be open about my perspectives, because my angle on the show is I have views, but I don't want them to affect the show too much. So if you want to hear, I can tell you. When I followed, I didn't hear or think much about media bias until the business with Jordan Peterson becoming infamous and famous. And I'd followed his lectures online as a more philosophical thing for a long time. So I felt I knew him, and I knew what he wasn't. And I also paid attention very carefully to the things that he said. And I know the papers that got it right and the ones that just straight up didn't say what he said.
Tell me, who got it right? Who misrepresented?
Well, okay, I don't have that great a memory, to be honest, but the ones that I found out were considered to be conservative, like the Sun, generally got the facts right. They might add their own opinion about it, and they might exaggerate a little bit, like just that they would in some ways do the mirror image of what I'm about to complain about, which is they would seem to sort of try and take what he said to their view. Like they'd come up with conclusions that he just didn't say that. But I definitely noticed in what ones, probably, see, I wish I could remember. I'm making the case and I don't remember exactly which papers. I just asked people I knew, is this generally more of a conservative paper? Is this more of a, and I could predict eventually. So that's a big gap in my explanation here, but they would, ones that were against him just got the facts wrong. I'm not making a statement about what you think about him. I'm just saying it was a matter of the facts. And that's what I've noticed elsewhere, is that what is referred to as bias is outright twisting of the facts, because I can find the facts. They'll take something someone said in an interview and just change it as if someone, there's this thing, I remember, I don't remember what the course was. There was some course years ago my sister was taking where what they were supposed to do was do movie reviews. And she got into had fun with doing nasty movie reviews. And the spirit of that style, where you're making fun of what they do, where you interpret whatever's done in the worst way possible, kind of, that's the spirit that I see. And to me, that's not bias. That's not having a perspective. It's twisting things. And I don't know who does more, who does what, but they definitely do twist things. I mean, the obvious thing, and I don't, well, I'll just say it then. Like this seems like a technicality to bring up, but for example, the big thing I've been paying attention to lately, as someone who pays attention to Joe Rogan's podcast, is that CNN had this thing saying that he'd taken horse dewormer to deal with COVID, which was wrong.
That who had taken it? Sorry,
Joe Rogan of the. Joe
that
Rogan
he had taken it. Okay.
Yes. Because they were conflating the form of medication that he took. He took a human form, which is ivermectin, is the basic thing. There's a whole thing about, I don't know whether you followed this or not, but like there's a whole thing of whether you take.
Yeah.
So,
but did they correct themselves?
No, not that I've seen.
Okay,
No,
because I do recall another instance, Julian, where CNN got some facts really wrong in some of the reporting on Trump, and 2 people were fired. So that's called that's called being accountable for your mistakes. Yeah, I wouldn't sit here and attempt to defend anybody who twisted the facts or who purposefully or maliciously twisted facts in order to sort of fit into an agenda that they might have.
Yeah,
you'll excuse the use of the word, but no, I'm not going to defend that. But mistakes, hell, I make mistakes every day. We all make mistakes.
Sure.
The question is, do you fess up to them, and do you apologize for them, and are you accountable for them?
Right, and I'm open to different interpretations, but it's when we're all looking at the same piece of information, we're all looking at the same message, and you have to bring in extra information to like I'm pretty careful. I think I don't like to assume people are up to something, but I just don't understand. Like I don't see bias; I see incompetence at best. And I have no idea who could do more, or who's doing more or less. So I'm not comparing anything to anyone else. But
never allege incompetence when laziness. Yeah. No, excuse me. Never allege bias when laziness or incompetence may be better explanations.
Yeah. But yeah, anyways, I just wanted to know what your perspective was. But yeah, I do have one, and it's different. Um, but yeah, it's the other distinction I was thinking of making maybe is that I wonder. It's not like you were talking about the Star uh, being critical of a liberal government. I well, that was. I have no idea whether it's a matter of being aligned with a party so much as being aligned with certain ways of looking at things.
Sure.
Which again wouldn't be so bad in my mind if it didn't seem to go along with actually misrepresenting very plain facts. You can draw whatever conclusions you want. That's some their business. But it's when it appears to be actually dealing with the facts that's shocked me as I've come to pay more attention to the news.
Right.
Which is why I wanted to talk to you, is because something I think we can agree on is, as far as I can tell, that's not something that I've felt was on your show, and
Mm.
yeah, it's definitely something which is refreshing. And the comments I've noticed um, say the same thing. Like various videos I've watched of yours on YouTube and elsewhere. That's what people consistently say. I don't know if you've read your comments. A lot of the TVO
I,
videos don't have them.
I tend not to read the comments online. I just don't have time for it. But if people email me directly, I always respond to emails, and I try to be as responsive as possible on Twitter and Facebook to people when they have direct comments or questions for me. Uh, but the sort of audience comments on YouTube or whatever, I don't really have.
No,
I don't have time for that.
no, and that's a good policy generally to ignore them. But there's some good ones. Anyways, yes. So I believe I should wrap up now because it's just about 5. But
I'm in
I'm
your
glad.
hands.
Oh, I need my report card. I feel like I'm well.
I took out the pen here and I was prepared to write down all sorts of comments about the kinds of. I have a blank sheet of paper in front of me here. I think you did a splendid job. I have really nothing to. I have nothing to advise you on. I think you followed the first and most important rule of hosting a podcast or a show or whatever, and that is you are yourself. You are not a phony. You're not trying to be somebody you're not. You are who you are. And I certainly sense that in you, that you were just being a genuine person and you weren't putting on airs or whatever. You're just being you. So that's number one. Good, as you should. From time to time, people email me and they say, why weren't you, like, why weren't you like Mike Wallace on 60 Minutes with this guest? Why didn't you get in there and beat their brains in? And I said, well, that's not me. I don't, if you want that, go watch Mike Wallace on 60 Minutes. But I don't do things that way. I hope I will. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is, you were yourself, and that's great. In terms of, what questions you asked, how you asked them, I got nothing to say. You did a great job, and you made your guest feel very comfortable and welcomed,
Oh,
and
good.
and
Good.
and allowed me to sort of be more open in talking about things. So, I think that's what you want to do. Whenever I do interviews, I'll tell you a little secret here. The first question out the gate is usually pretty neutral, lean, open ended. It's not like heavy hitting. It's not aggressive because I want to open people up. I want them comfortable and I want them open. And if you hit them over the head right off the top, they're going to close up right away. I want people opening up. And so that's what I tend to do. And hopefully I get better results because of it.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I don't think I have anything more to say. I have no special way of ending these things. Sometimes I end them in sentences.